Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy, and we are trying a 6 o'clock webinar, but I'll tell you, we're off to a great start. Tonight, my guest is Robyn Hood. I just love chatting with Robyn Hood. We've been yakking away now, waiting for everybody to come in, and she's got a great presentation, so I'm going to turn it right over to her. Welcome, Robyn. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Now we get to do the really fun thing of trying to share the screen again. Let's see if this is going to work. I don't have any videos. So
for those of you who don't know Robyn, she is a TTouch trainer. I think she's going to tell us that here.
Oopsie, except no, I'm going to do it back here.
Yeah, that's the wrong display.
Does that work now?
No, we're on your.
Oh, okay, just a second. I'm going to try something here, and then otherwise I'm going to do something else.
Robyn got a new screen. And
does that work?
There, woohoo! Good job.
But I'll tell you what's really weird. I don't know. Oh, yes, I can move it from here. I was going to say, because I'm seeing now on my big TV, the presenter screen. So anyway, we'll do well. We'll do well. All right. So, and we go. So this was an article actually based on an article that one of our instructors, Edie Jane Eaton, wrote. And she wrote this in 2009. And it was, so the title of the article was Shedding Some Candlelight on Resistance in Horses. And this isn't just about horses. I do one for dogs, so it's pretty interchangeable, any of those kinds of things. And so I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what candles are when we get going. And for some people, it really helps them to sometimes understand their horse's behavior and maybe just kind of get beyond the behavior. So for those of you who don't know about the Tellington Method, it was developed by my sister. And you know what, Wendy? It's coming up onto 50 years. It was 1975, after she had started in the Feldenkrais training, that she kind of started this idea. Can you imagine that? Almost 50 years. So it really is, and it's a huge evolution as we've gone through things. But basically, it's a all-encompassing, respectful approach to working with animals. And we think that it's not about just respecting the animals, but it's also about respecting the people that come with the animals. It has a positive effect on behavior, performance, and well-being. And for many people, one of the most important parts is that it deepens the relationship with your horse. And I think that the average person has a horse because they want to have a relationship with their horse. Mm-hmm. So it includes non-invasive touch, exercises in motion or movement, and that really helps to influence the habitual patterns of tension and posture by giving new information to the nervous system. So the basic components, I just have to go, yes, that's right. So this is sort of just a slide of our basic components. And so observation is key, and it's going to be done the whole time. And this is where Surefoot just fits so well into the work. Observation and feedback. So you're observing all the time, you're doing things, and you're looking for feedback from the horse. And the only time they can give us feedback is if we pause. And that's why I think too, with the Surefoot, it's so important that the horse has that opportunity to just be there with it. We consider approach and handling. We have the body work portion. We have the groundwork elements. We have and this slide doesn't have the joy of riding. So we have different equipment that we use. And, I just finished a 3-day here, and it was actually really fun. We had 2 outside horses. And one was a Canadian mare, one of the nicest Canadian horses I've ever actually met. And when she first came, her sort of the way that she spoke about her horse was what I think is where she heard from other people that, she can't stop eating because she's this and that. And, she's, a horse that likes to eat. She's a little bit pushy on the ground and so on. Well, she was such a lovely horse. So we did the first 2 days of on the ground and body work. And then I had them ride the 2 horses. One was an Andalusian mare. And in just a little bit, we were able to really help them change the balance rein, made a huge difference to this lovely Andalusian mare who had a really nice front end, but she didn't have any muscling really on her back end. And the beautiful rider and, very sympathetic rider. The the balance rein allowed her, because the mare was kind of sucking back because she wasn't really using herself, and the change was beautiful. So that was really fun to be able to integrate all of the things together. And of course, this philosophy of respect is sort of overlying everything. And the word respect by definition means to look again. And if we think about how it's used most of the time in the horse world, it's not exactly like that. So it's respect, look at your horse again. So over the last nearly 50 years, one of our sort of biggest tenets is that you look beyond the behavior. So Linda believed that sort of the primary cause of unwanted behavior was fear, pain, or fear of pain. And of course, we also look at if they don't feel safe. None of us really feel very good if we don't feel safe, and also miscommunication on both parts and misunderstanding. So, and this sort of next part is kind of basically from Edie Jane's article. And so you might accept that your horse is not, basically not really stubborn or resistant and so on. You might, that might be believable for you, but sometimes you can't always find what triggers the behavior, or else we think we know. And then when it still happens, we get upset because we really actually don't know. And if we can't see a reason, we think there's no excuse. And listen, I've been there with horses. I thought, this horse, you do all these things, and, maybe this horse is just one that doesn't want to cooperate. And I have to say that every time I've thought that, I've found there's been such a good reason. So I think it's something to really think about. Or we might go to great lengths to avoid things. Like I had this lovely thoroughbred that we got, this is like 30 years ago, got very inexpensively because you had to take the bridle apart to put it on, and he was a gorgeous horse. And if I'd known then what I know now, of course, I would have done things differently. I just took the bridle apart, but I would have had tools to work with him on that. So, or we might avoid riding with the stick because our horse is nervous of it. So triggers can sometimes be kind of a wild goose chase. And if we think of analogy for ourselves, you might be, a fairly, level-headed person most of the time. However, you wake up one morning and you have a headache, a splitting headache, and your dog's gotten into the trash, or your partner's like really yelling at you for leaving it out. And then you're late for work and you go to the car and you're nearly out of fuel. And then but your gas station is closed because they're doing some refurbishing. And then you have a detour and you finally get to work and you go in and there's no coffee. And you explode because there's no coffee. Normally no coffee would not have been a big deal. You would have just, gone in and got the coffee. But those things like layer, it's like the old saying, the straw that broke the camel's back. So those things wouldn't normally bother you, but combined you can lose it. And certainly we see this with horses. So what are candles? So candles are kind of internal and external concerns. So there'll be some that we can see, and there'll be some that we may know about, really big ones, and there'll be others that we don't, that can be really, really small. So you might have obviously tension and pain in the body is a big one. A horse might have ulcers. They might have grooming sensitivity, poor saddle fit, or an unbalanced rider. You could have small ones where maybe you don't see them. They seem like they're a little bit unbalanced. They might be afraid of things from behind. They rush through narrow gates, or other horses or traffic coming up behind them. Or maybe they have poor body awareness and proprioception. Now, it's only when all the candles are lit that the worst behavior is seen. So here, if we look at this, most of us and most beings kind of have a little bit of a simmering, we can manage when things are kind of simmering and ticking along. But if we have some big candles, so we've got maybe ulcers or saddle fit, or horse that needs dental work, maybe their living situation is not appropriate for them, or maybe it's changed. Maybe they've got, poor trimming or shoeing and their foot balance is off. Their diet doesn't suit them. Maybe the bridle and the saddle, maybe the bridle is really tight around the ears. The saddle pad is filthy. It's never washed. Maybe they're claustrophobic. Maybe they have tension and pain. So you'll have little candles and you'll have big candles, but it's when all those candles are lit that you see the most extreme behavior. And while Edie Jane started thinking about this, is because some small candles can be kind of difficult to recognize. The horse appears to be doing fine, and the candles may be totally unrelated to the issue that's described as to be the big problem with the horse. Or we might think that that's just the way they are. He's always done that. So it's just a horse. And again, we've had up to 200 horses here at a time, and I've certainly had thoughts of those myself. So what prompted the writing of this article was actually a horse that was brought to Edie Jane because the horse just lost his cookies when he was at a horse show. And so she wanted to know was there anything with TTouch that she could do at the show that would help her? And so Edie Jane did a little bit of work. She did a little body work to reduce the tension. She noticed a few things with the balance. So she did some work in the playground of higher learning. And so didn't do a lot, just did a little bit, never saw the horse again. Saw the woman at the end of the summer and said, so, how's it going? How's it going at horse shows? And the woman kind of looked around and said, oh, he never did it. He was never upset for it. So she was kind of like, oh yeah, I got it. So it's a little bit like if you're a pyromaniac and you go to a psychiatrist for some help, you don't have to light his office on fire in order for them to believe you. So what we've found with the TTouch work, and I think it certainly works the same way with the Surefoot, is that we don't have to know. It addresses so many underlying issues that we may not really be aware of. Like we tend to look for the big things and correct them. We're looking for the things to make something better rather than considering that, maybe my horse has some kind of tension in the belly or tension in the mouth. We noticed that. I remember Linda saying a horse that the problem with this horse, the problem is described, is that the horse absolutely would be explosive at times. And as she was going over the body, what she noticed a couple of things. One was it was very, very tight in the mouth, like really tight and dry inside the mouth and lips just like rocks. And his face from his nose down was ice cold. Oh. And so it was really interesting. I mean, so what she did is she just did, touches around the muzzle as she would and inside the mouth, and lowered the head and did touches on the ears. And the horse completely settled and the temperature changed. And it was reported that he didn't have these sort of explosive responses. So there's got to be lots of things that happen inside the body that we're not necessarily aware of that can make a difference. I went to one of the first times, I think it was the first time I went to Australia. A woman in Western Australia who was a vet had an off-the-track thoroughbred who was really difficult to shoe. He had to be tranquilized. And her partner was a farrier. And so she organized this 2-day and she brought the horse to the 2-day. And I guess she thought we were going to shoe the horse at the workshop. And of course we didn't. We just did what we do with some leg circles and maybe walking over poles, the normal things, little tail work and so on. Nothing that you could say directly addressed the shoeing issue. So they took the horse home, and I saw her a week later, and she came to another course, and she said she was so disappointed that we hadn't really addressed the shoeing problem, but they didn't have any tranquilizer. And so they thought the next day they would, just see what happened, and he was perfect. So you can't explain that in that we did something, we did A to correct or to work with B. But she also noticed that she said to me, because I said I thought it was a huge balance issue. And when we showed him different options with his balance, it somehow changed something. And she said, oh, it's interesting because he always would sweat in the trailer, always. And the only time when they took him home from the course, he didn't sweat. He wasn't sweating. So it was interesting that these threads of things and that go together. And again, I think that's where the observation with using Surefoot, with doing anything we do, is so important. And then there was an interesting trailering study that was done by a vet student who, she spent 3 months at our farm, and she had to do a behavior study that was, had met the criteria for a scientific study. And so she took 10 horses. They evaluated, an independent evaluator developed, said they were slow loaders. So they measured pulse, respiration. They took cortisol samples, which at the time they didn't even know what that meant. She was interested. So she did 6 sessions with each horse and person, 30 to 45 minutes, little body work, some groundwork with the playground, but nothing to do with the trailer. And they were not allowed to practice anything in between. And she also did a riding session with most of them. And at the end, when they retested, 9 out of 10 of the horses loaded significantly quicker and with more ease. And the 10th horse, she didn't have a chance to, the woman didn't have time to sort of retest the horse. So it was pretty interesting when you look sort of statistically. But for me, one of the most interesting things is that what she noticed in pulse and respiration is that the horses that were the most nervous loaders or slow loaders, their pulse and respiration went up when they saw the trailer. And the horses that got into the trailer and then stood perfectly still had a higher pulse and respiration than the horses that got in and didn't scramble, but just kind of moved around so that they could kind of organize themselves. So it's kind of interesting because horses need to know that they can reorganize themselves a little bit inside a horse trailer. So Edie Jane is a great one for just saying, so just do the work. And Edie Jane is also a Feldenkrais practitioner as well, which, kind of goes along with that. And, what we notice is that just doing the work can bring about dramatic and lasting results. It's not about focusing on fixing the problem. If we blow out the small candle, the small candles will be blown out as we do the work. We don't have to say, I'm going to blow out this candle and this one. It just happens. The rider that came to her didn't ask about reducing reactivity, but rather how to cope with it because she didn't think it was possible. And the end result was less reactivity without focusing, fewer candles, and the candles get smaller. And this helps to move an animal from instinctive reacting into acting. And then the issues can really actually resolve themselves. So just the way he is, it's rarely true, but I swear that everybody that's had a horse has said, well, that's just how he is. There's nothing we can do to change it because if you don't know what to do, right, that's just how he came. So we find that if we can identify these small candles by noticing how a horse displays concern. And you see this, this fooling around kind of behavior. An example that I will often see is when we're doing body work. We had this last course that I just did, and the horse started to really fidget and kind of move around. And someone said, "Oh, I think they're just bored. They're just kind of tired. They're done." Well, when we moved back to the place where the horse was okay, and the horse was totally okay and was totally not bored anymore. The same thing, I see this when people put a saddle on the horse and the horse doesn't want to stand for, mounting. Well, it's like, well, they're anxious to get going. The question is why? If they're comfortable, why can't they stand? Mm. So if we can understand the vocabulary of our horse's body, and that's, including being aware of the breath, the change in breath, the increased heart rate, tension patterns, tight tail, all of those sorts of things. And we can just do a small change. We can just pay a little attention to that. It can make a big difference. So the language of horses is pretty individual. Some will, be resistant or evasive. Some will paw, some will barge, some will grow roots. There are all ways that a horse can be saying, you know, I'm not really happy with what's going on, but I'm actually pretty polite, you know, so I'm actually pretty polite and fairly compliant to go along with it. So notice when the behavior occurs, and notice if you just change one thing, does that behavior diminish a little bit? You know, if it's that you're grooming them in a certain place and they move around, if you go back to the place that they weren't moving around, do they stop? That's the horse trying to tell you something. So we really want to notice that subtle behavior in order to find those critical little candles that are always burning. So there's 4 main categories. We have misunderstanding, tension and discomfort, fear, and of course, physical issues. So with misunderstanding is acknowledge concern by changing what you're doing. And, you know, I think if you've been around horses long enough, you've been told, don't, if you start something, you know, you got to finish it just like that, or the horse has won. Now, I haven't quite figured out the prize, but if we can change something small, we can just stop for a moment, pause and exhale, you know, and that goes a long way to help develop trust. It lets your horse know that you're listening. Both your stress levels will drop. And I just encourage people, give your horse the benefit of the doubt. There's no harm in that, you know, just give it a moment. So tension and discomfort can definitely affect everything. So tension patterns affect posture, and posture is related to behavior. So if we think about these horses that are high-headed, flighty horses, they often have a tight neck and a drop back. And when you've been discussing, or you know, this idea of the horses being jammed on the front end, of course, that's going to create more flight in a horse. What we noticed is that often horses that are quite emotional or neurotic hold a lot of tension in their mouth and jaw. I think people do too. You know, it's like that, I'm fine. Tension in the flanks and sides can make a horse either unresponsive to the leg or overly reactive. A clamped tail and hindquarter tension are often go along with horses that are concerned about things coming up from behind. If you have a horse that has trouble loading in a trailer, I suggest to people that they just do a little bit of the tail work, just a few tail circles. That can, because most of those horses, you find their tails are absolutely clamped. And I think their hind legs can't move when they're so tight. Tension in the shoulders and upper legs can reduce circulation to the feet. And I often see horses that are, you know, the horses that are nervous about going maybe through different, it could be water, but it could also just be a change in light, you know, from light to dark, shadows and so on. And if you feel their legs, they may be cold in their legs, they may be cold in part of their legs, they may just not have a lot of feeling into the body. Any kind of stroking the legs can make a difference to help them be more grounded. So fear, well, strongly affects of how safe an animal feels. And it's the same with us. I mean, what drives most humans to become aggressive, right, is because we're afraid. We're afraid of getting hurt. We're afraid of looking stupid. There's all kinds of things that will drive that. If we feel insecure, it aggravates the fear, and it really undermines a being's ability to learn. And it can have physiological and behavioral consequences due to stress. And, you know, we know that a certain amount of stress is necessary for learning. I mean, that if otherwise you would just be in your kind of normal state of everything is kind of okay. If the stress is too much, there's a release of a hormone called ACTH, which actually blocks learning. They may do it, but they haven't really learned it. Its sense of security is so vital in order to overcome fear. And that's why things like stacking a horse out does not overcome their fear. What it does is teaches them to go into freeze. And freeze is not about really feeling safe. Horses that have good balance, and balance is physical, emotional, and mental, are more confident and have more self-control. Mindful movement helps create calm and focus. And that's where the elements that we use in our groundwork are generally quite slow, so that there's a really, it's more like Tai Chi of doing it with the horse. And we find that our wand or our stiff whip, doesn't work so well when it's really stingy, helps to ground a horse. And as you're stroking, actually remember to exhale, because when we do things on the exhale, it's different than when we do them on the inhale. And of course, health issues, which have been, I think, certainly over the last 20 years, I think people have become more and more aware of how health is going to affect horses, you know, ulcers, poorly balanced hooves, sweet itch can make horses just almost beside themselves. A gut imbalance, hormone imbalance, dental problems, and they, of course, they're going to contribute to unwillingness to cooperate. And I think it's remarkable how well horses do, kind of in spite of us sometimes, and how they just kind of suck it up and manage to do it. So the intention of what we do is to help horses move beyond instinct and learn how to learn. And these instincts are represented by reactive behavior and by protective tension patterns, which interfere with movement and influence attitude. So a really simple exercise for those of you who are not familiar with the TTouch approach is if you run your hands slowly over your horse, that can start to release tension and habitual patterns of posture. And if your horse is tense, start with the back of the hand. And notice if you get to certain places, does the breathing change? Does the horse start to become bored and move around? And if you go back to those places where they were okay, does that stop? That gives you a lot of information. Short breaks can help to really process the effects of the touch, because it's in the pause, and pause is so important. That's when our nervous system takes on the information. If we can allow the freedom for a horse to rebalance and just take stock of their environment, it helps to develop greater self-awareness. We used to do starting young horse clinics here every summer because I had so many young horses to start. And I don't know, about 6 or 7 years ago, I started when we bring the horses into the arena, into whatever it was, outdoor, indoor, we just let them go free. And we let them explore on their own for 15 or 20 minutes, because so often we don't actually let horses have a chance to just explore the environment that we expect them to be focused in. And I started this in Australia with Icelandics. We had six Icelandics, young Icelandics, never been in an indoor arena. And so we bring them to this huge indoor arena. And I said, let's just let them all go. And they first of all moved like a school of fish, as Icelandics will do, around this arena for probably 10 minutes. And then they kind of broke off individually, and they went and they sniffed around in different places. They were so easy to work with because they weren't nervous about, their environment. They had a chance to check it out. And man, if I'd known, I about 4 years before that, I did a training in what was East Germany with Turkaner Place. And we took these young horses from the property that had never been in this arena. And we had a nightmare the first day, and then they were okay. If I let them just go free, we would have been so much further ahead. So it really helps horses to have a clearer self-image, better self-control, and to really deepen your relationship as you allow him to speak to you, as you listen to what they have to say. And I remember, years ago, I made this, I wrote this article about if we listen to the whispers, they don't have to shout. And it was about a horse that it was actually about grooming a horse, but horses do try to be polite, and we sometimes don't allow that because we are taught to, in a way, not listen sometimes. So the result can be a horse who, as long as there's not continuing negative influences stressing him, and you can't have a horse that has this sort of continuing to have, ulcers or whatever it is. I mean, there'll be some change, but you can't expect it to be permanent. But what we find generally is they keep getting better and better, more resilient. And resiliency to me is so important that, they're quicker to recover. They're not robots. I don't want a robot, but if something happens, they can recover. And the candles get smaller. So when the candles are smaller, what happens is the behavior stabilizes. So you see all these candles got smaller. So yeah, there'll be a little simmering, but you don't have the thermometer going up. And I think if you just think about that and kind of remember when you're looking at your horses and you're looking at behavior, is what's behind it. And I think that can make a big difference for you. So there you go.
Awesome. That's awesome. And you know, it's so fascinating to me. I listen to people's words when they talk about their horses, and I point it out to them. And you know, I don't know that they always get what I'm pointing out, because and I think it's from tradition. You know, I think that's one of the things, is that we've had horses in our lives for centuries.
Yeah.
And you get these traditions passed down and passed down and passed down, and you watch them be passed down. And the way we talk about horses, which is like, you know, he's just trying to scrape you off the wall, as opposed to, you know, you've just cranked your leg into him and he's actually pushing into that pressure. And so he's flying over to the wall. And it's so hard for us sometimes to simply stop. And I'm just as guilty as anybody else, although I try, you know, I work on it. But, you know, I'll find myself getting into a situation, not just necessarily with horses, but you know, if you can just stop, just break it for a second.
Yeah.
You can usually change. But there's something about, it's like you lock into these belief systems, or you lock into these patterns, or you lock into the arguments, or you lock into the fight. And it's so hard to stop and break it, you know, and just say, oh, you know.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting with this Canadian mare, because she wanted grass. She was on a very strict low sugar diet because, you know, to maintain her weight and so on. And so she'd come out of the arena and she would just dive towards grass. And actually all I did to start with was I just said, let's just clip your lead line onto the side of your halter instead of underneath. And I showed her a simple thing. I showed her actually how to stroke the lead a little bit. And I mean, if you're walking your horse and you don't want them to eat grass, like, you don't have to pull on them. You just set a boundary, and that's as far as your head gets to go down. So it gets to that, and then you release. The problem is people feel the pressure and they start pulling, and then the horse just pulls against them. Yeah. She got it so quickly, and her horse was perfect. And I said, so you know what? You can also let your horse eat grass at times, but then just say that's enough. And it was really easy. I just showed her how to just disengage the horse, so it wasn't like a fight.
And that's such a good point, because that's another thing, is people want to set these, they can never eat grass in a halter. Yeah. They can never eat, and you set these really hard boundaries, and you know, there's going to be a time when that boundary isn't going to work. It's better to be able to have the choices.
Yeah.
But you know, you mentioned it, and clipping the lead shank to the side of the halter is one of the fastest ways to make a change.
I know.
I just had dear friends, and they have these two horses that they got that were rescue horses, and the one thoroughbred, and you know, anything with his halter from underneath, and he is just a night. And I just clipped it to the side ring, and they were like astonished, because they just stopped.
Well, I mean, it makes perfect like sense, because when it's underneath and the horse takes their head away from you, you have to do something big, because the halter starts sliding around, and then you've got to do something big. When it's on the side, it's kind of like taking someone kind of by the arm and trying to take them from somewhere in the middle of the body. And it is, and being able to show people something that even little kids can handle horses like that. That's the thing that, you know, it makes such a difference. So, I mean, it was just so nice, because I know she loved this horse, and she'd done such a great job with the horse. But I think for her, I think there was a lot of outside where she boards. I think there's a lot of things that people say, oh, she's so pushy, or she's so this, or she's so that. And she wasn't at all. She was like such a nice horse. But if she was on the forehand. And so when she would get leaning and then would be pulled against, she has a pretty big front end and she would like fall forward. So, but there was no malice in this horse. There's not one bit of malice. Such a nice horse. And we had, I was trying to think of which pads we had her on. We did have her on the pads. The Andalusian mare was not interested, which was interesting because I love integrating just different things. Although what I will say is where the Andalusian mare she wanted a hard pad on her heel. Oh. And I saw her several times just put it there. And of course, her person was kind of like, no, that's just an accident. And I go, I don't think so. When I see it like 3 or 4 times, I think it wasn't an accident at all, but was enough for her. So it was just, it's interesting. But then again, that's another place to observe, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All those things.
So, and I'm astounded that it's 50 years since Linda started this.
Isn't it?
Because I've been involved since 85.
Yeah.
So 40, that's 40.
I know.
Not quite. This is 22.
Yeah, but getting close.
Getting close. And
yeah.
And the other thing is that it's so interesting to see how it's taken time, but you see the threads of it now. It's like ripples on the pond, right? And I think probably we've used that is that the ripples are going out and you're seeing them percolate and come in different places now and in different ways, like tail work and ear work, which is now, so widely accepted.
I know.
And so it's, I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes it seems like, there isn't change, but when you look back and you look perspective and you look historically, you realize just how far we've come.
Yeah, no, there is, there definitely is. And I see so many things in the dog world too, that things that, we've been saying for 20 years and now people are kind of starting to say it and look at things like that. And it's good, I think that's everybody's ready in their own time, but, Linda's always been 20 years ahead of her time.
Yeah.
Always. Oh, and longer than that, when you think about that physical therapy for the athletic horse was written in 1965.
Oh, wow.
And it was about doing massage on sport horses.
Is that still available? Is that around?
It's a tiny little paperback book, and it was, they published it from the research farm, and it was based on the kind of massage that the gypsy in Russia taught her grandfather. And that's what he would do on his racehorses every day before a race. And he could, or, at some point they would tell him then, based on what their body felt like, whether they could run, and he didn't run them if they didn't. And if only people would pay attention to thoroughbreds and actually all sorts of horses, they would prevent so many injuries and in some cases death. Because look at the stories of the horse. I think the horse that won the Kentucky Derby or whatever, and the horse then wouldn't go in the trailer, didn't want to go in the trailer the day for another race. And then they got him in finally, and then he was like either died or was seriously injured. The horse, horses know, right?
Right.
They know if they're not okay.
And so, yeah. So does anybody have any questions for Robyn? We've got a little bit of time, and it'd be great if any of you have questions, you can put it in the Q&A or a story. So Karen,
remember about leading Equus. Yeah, so Equus, and they wrote, the first magazine was Practical Horseman. They did a 2-part series. And then Equus, they did a 3-part series that turned out to be the Touch That Teaches. It was a little, I think I might have even been Bobby Lieberman that wrote it.
Well, I was going to say wasn't Bobby the original editor of Equus?
I maybe, or she
I
certainly
believe-
was highly involved in it because she wrote a lot of stuff for.
Yeah,
for Linda
if
stuff.
I'm not mistaken, she was the original editor.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, but how did Bobby meet Linda? Through Equus?
probably, maybe. I don't know. It's a good question. I have to ask
Because
Linda.
Bobby edited my Surefoot workbook.
Oh, great. Yeah, she's done a lot.
Yeah.
Would TTouch or Surefoot pads be helpful for a 2-year-old recently diagnosed with locking patella, right rear? Have you used it on horses with locking patellas?
What we find is that the hard slants
Yeah,
on the rear. So you start with a flat pad, but the hard slants on the rear, short periods of time, because you want to get the muscles to activate a little. And so it's gradual. You're not going to do it for long periods of time at first,
Yeah.
because you don't want to make them sore. That's always the caution. And with a
Yeah.
2-year-old, obviously you wouldn't be doing long periods of time. But yes.
What breed is this horse?
Karen, what breed is your horse? Just type it in.
And the reason I'm asking for the size, because I had an Icelandic. It was a
She
don't
doesn't
know. Oh, okay. Doesn't know, but big, little, in between. The only reason I'm asking is this. So we had a couple of Icelandics that came from a line that this
Oh, it's her friend.
had a tendency to have locking patellas. Oh, it's a friend's. Oh, I see. Okay. So what I did to help them unlock is I'm going to show you on my horse, my Minty horse here. And
Oh, wow.
here's my horse. This is my Inca horse. So her head turns,
Nice.
her mouth opens.
Where did
Her
you
ears-
find her?
Well, the first one I saw was in Australia, and then she was a giveaway on Facebook. So she has
Oh,
movement.
wow.
I know. So this is what we did. Her legs won't move like I did this. So the reason I asked about the size of the horse. So I put a hand on either side of the hindquarters, standing beside the horse. And actually what I did, it's like a Feldenkrais exercise where, so the foot's on the ground and I circled the
Sure.
hip over the ground. So it's a reverse leg circle.
Right.
So by putting my hands on either side of the horse, and then what I did was I would put a little bit more weight on one of my legs of the hip of the leg I wanted to move. And I moved my leg in a very small circle, but then my hands would take the horse.
Right.
So it's not about, using your hands to do it, but if, obviously if the horse is okay with it, but I think that with the Surefoot pad could be not necessarily at the same time, but
Right.
I think that would be interesting. I know what I found is I used it initially to help them unlock.
Oh, sure. Yep.
And then I found that actually it made a difference just in general. So anyway, it's worth a go.
And what I really like is you're mirroring what you're doing with the horse with your body. Your hands
Exactly.
are just the conduit of what your body's doing to the horse's body.
Exactly. Because as soon as you start using your arms, then you're
doesn't
out of the way. You could also probably just put your hand on the top of the croup and do that same movement, so that you're just thinking about moving your, through your body, and then that will move your hand.
I wonder if she's going through a growth spurt too.
Yeah, probably.
That's
Yeah.
the other thing. And body wraps, do you think body wraps would be helpful?
Yeah, body wrap could be interesting. Yeah, I was actually thinking about even lifts with wraps could be interesting. And I would actually, I'm just thinking about this, except I took all my body wraps away. I might, again, obviously the horse has to be okay, and I probably would start on the front. I would probably start on the front leg and just even do some kind of lifts between just kind of run the wrap between the front legs and just do a little stretch and then slowly release that. Because there's going to be a certain amount of tension that's taken in the front. when you've got this amount of tension in the back. And then if the horse is okay, before I put a wrap around the horse's leg, if they have a long enough tail, I just take the tail under it and let them feel the tail on the inside of the leg. And then I take a wrap underneath and do kind of a little lift with the wrap. But even a regular body wrap could be helpful to just get kind of more connection.
Yep, and bring in that awareness.
Yep, exactly. And it affects that, when I talk to Ricky Schultz, is that talking about the fascia lines.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So again, just releasing that.
Yep. Cool. Good question.
Yeah. Nobody else. Oh, she has that. Good. She has a wrap book for both humans and
great.
horses. So that works. Okay, perfect.
We'll play with that. All right. Has anybody else got any questions for Robyn about the candles? Or I really like the way that it helps us think about it not as an event, but as accumulation of things. And more when I'm talking to different vets and stuff about things like bowed tendons, unless it's an acute injury, it's an accumulation. It's a lot of little candles that are lit up and they're just flickering away. And whether it's teeth, feet, back, saddle, rider, and then eventually you wind up with a bowed tendon, but everybody treats the bowed tendon like, wow, where did that come from?
Right. Yeah.
But there's been a lot of candles that are coming along, causing that to actually finally have to.
Yeah. And that's why if you see a sudden change in your horse's behavior, pay attention. Yeah. Like it's not, there's probably something that's actually going on. It isn't just, behavior is a form of communication. And so if we can pay attention to that makes a huge difference. Otherwise it's just, listen, we've all been there in the horse world. It's just like, get after them a little bit more, or change your bit or change whatever, but it's there. I just think it's so important to look beyond it. And it's a lot easier too than going through all this stuff. And talk about building a relationship. And that doesn't mean horses have to, sometimes we all have to do things sometimes we don't want to do, but how you ask them to do it. Listen, it's like shearing our sheep. Okay, so here we are with these sheep who have two of them had never been sheared before, and two of them had been sheared before. And of course, they've always been put on their backs, not done by us because we don't know how to even shear at all. And so, but they're pretty friendly. So we gave them a little bit of food. I put a little body rope on the first one just to contain them a little bit. And that was actually really helpful. And then we just gave them a little bit of food and started shearing them. Now, it's not a 4-H job, as you saw on the Facebook page, but they're cooler because it's pretty hot. But we really gave them a chance. And the last one, we couldn't do all of her because her wool, they're 3 months later than they should have been sheared, but we couldn't get a shearer. And they're like really, really, really woolly. And so we have to get some other shears, but I'm going to actually probably get hand shears. But they were so good because we kind of gave them a chance, and with her, she started to get upset. So we did a bit and we paused before she showed us she was upset, before she had to do something to display that she was upset. And then she didn't. So we just paused a moment and then we would carry back and so on. But it's, yes, I like what Megan said. This, symbology of the candles rather than the names that include more negative components. I agree. And it does, I don't think that most people actually, if it's their own horse, that they don't necessarily want to have say negative things about their horses, but they hear it from so many people that then they start to stick those labels on their horse. And it's so hard to get a label off once.
It is really hard to get a label off.
No, so
really hard. And because I mirror back to people things that they say about their horse and explain to them that it's the horse isn't doing it to them. And I sense their discomfort. They're used to everybody just going along with, oh yeah, he's just and
right.
And they get really uncomfortable when I confront that. But I don't stop.
Right.
because somebody needs to be the advocate, the voice for that horse, and say it from the horse's perspective of, this one horse in particular, I did a little in hand work. I put the rider up. She could do some little lateral work and went forward and trot. And then the horse is going to go to a trainer, and the trainer got on, and, he went into his habit, which is falling through the right shoulder, which is the habit that he came with, which we had resolved by using no leg and going forward. Right. And so as soon as she felt him falling sideways, she started putting leg on him, and then he is slamming her into the wall because, right. And so everybody's like, oh, that's, he's just trying to scrape her out. And I'm like, no, we've just caused him to have to go back to a habit that really is not great.
Right.
And then when you point out from that perspective that this is a habit pattern and the other isn't strong enough to override when he gets stressed, that he's going to go back to that. But, and to her credit, she asked me what to do. And I said, no leg, go forward. And boop, the next thing.
Well, and remember that's her habit is so strong, and her default behavior is so strong that when we get under stress, we go back to what we learned first. We go back to what we know, just the same way that our horses do. But, I often will say to people, our motivation for wanting them to change a habit is entirely different from their motivation. You know what I mean? Obviously, what they're doing does work for them at some level, but we get under stress. And that was the same like with this Canadian mare. She wasn't very forward in the ring. And I actually had her use, like, not using her legs, like, because her leg would get back a bit and kick. And I just had her use more like a fluttery leg, like just that little ankle kind of thing. Horse went forward perfectly.
Yeah.
It was the kind of holding. And it's what people are taught, right? More leg, right?
So Gret says, a horse I'm getting to know balks at times. He might want me to be at a different place along his body and be really present in order to get him stuck. I'd love to know what happened to him and what he's holding in his body. And you may never know what happened to him, and Robyn, I'm sure you've seen this, that you can be going on and doing something, whether it's a TTouch or putting them on surefoot pads, and they show you a pattern. Show you, and I find it fascinating. I've had horses show me things that it's like, whoa, I had no idea.
Well, and I think there's that. I think that's why doing anything that's novel, like when it's as hard for us to get out of our patterns of habit of how we do things. And when we can do that, and then we can have the horse do that, like that's where doing anything different, instead of the same thing over, like it makes such a difference. I mean, I was thinking too of that, the vaulting mare that we worked with in New Zealand. And I used her for like a TTouch demo. And then I had you come in, and she'd had lots of, part of her foot had been ripped off, so she had stall rest forever, and they'd never been able to stop her. She was a big mare. I mean, they're very experienced horse handlers, but they would, kind of just, work with it. But the change in that horse, when it was hard for her to stand on the pads to start with, because it was hard for her to pick up her feet. But after she did, and then we just changed a little bit about the movement, they just kept bringing her back because she was so much better in the night shows. And they were concerned, you don't want to, if you've got a horse that's in a, like demonstration or something, you don't want to mess it up by doing something that's too different.
Right.
But clearly whatever we did made a difference, a positive difference. The horse was such a sweet horse. So I think that's the other thing, is we can't necessarily know. We just have to, kind of offer a novelty that's not too novel. And that's again why you let them pick the pads, and you don't pick the pad that you think is the right pad, right? Because how do we know? And the same thing, you just, if something isn't working, do something else, just change something. And that goes a long way. And it's hard to do, especially if you're in front of a group of people.
Oh, good. He loves the pads. Yeah, it's really awesome.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah, cool.
All right, Robyn. Well, it's just been another wonderful webinar from you. Thank you so much. And I think it's a lot of fun things for people to think about. And Diane says ongoing challenge, goal duty, just stay patient and guide people. Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
Cool.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. Just remember, you can find this and all the other webinars on the Surefoot Equine YouTube channel. And I think we have about one a week for the next couple of weeks, but I'm traveling next week, so there won't be any. But we'll be back. We'll send out an email and let you know. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Wendy. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.